Hey everybody, Renfell here. Welcome back. We are doing our first deep dive into the draft of the ORC license that first became available on April 7th. If you remember, I did a brief look at everything on the 8th, Saturday. Um, but Sunday being a busy day and Monday being a busy day, I haven't had a chance to actually sit down and do a deep dive yet until today. So we're going to be sitting down today and going through the document in greater detail. If you haven't already been involved over at the ORC Alliance Discord, there have been some great conversations taking place, some great feedback being presented. If I had to guess, whenever they go into the next draft of this, they're going to be doing some polishing of the language around copyright and probably some of the stuff, because I think some people have some questions. Some of the questions I think are a little uh, well, I'm just gonna. I want to say this in a way that is not meant to be disrespectful. I think there are some people who don't have an understanding of business law, and so there are some questions that are, I think, a little naive in terms of what something refers to. But that's totally acceptable because everybody has different understandings of the law, and not everyone that is a part of this is someone who needs to have a mastery of business language to understand what's going on. And they did specifically state how I think it might even be here on this page, or it might be in the ACE. Let's open this up real quick, because there's a section where they talk about, they wanted to keep things simple, but in places where they couldn't keep things simple, yeah. Why is the license so complicated? And they say, we wish it were less complicated too. We opted for simplicity where possible. Can I make this big? Can I? No, 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 no. Fit to width. There we go. That's much better for reading. Ha ha ha. All right, they do have a section here where they say, we wish it were less complicated too. We opted for simplicity wherever possible, but when we were faced with the decision between precision or simplicity, we opted for precision. We wish it was simpler, but slicing copyright in half is challenging. We want this to last for a very long time and resist all imaginable legal challenges. If we could have found a way to make it simpler, we would have done so. And I think that that's something that's very important for everybody who's reading this to understand. As simple as many people want it to be, when it comes to law, you cannot oversimplify some things because this gets into the issue of, remember what Wizards of the Coast was trying to do with the OGL, because they said that the language wasn't specific enough and it didn't have certain things in there, and so they needed to update the language to make it more modern and cover the things that that they thought it needed to cover. That's what this is attempting to do. It's attempting to make sure that that kind of stuff never happens by future proofing this document with legal speak that is in places very complex, but complex because it needs to be to ensure that it can never be changed in the future. That's very important. And they do have the irrevocable language in the document. So without further ado, this is the AXE document, which was the answers and explanations document, which really is just an overview. And we're not going to read through this again because we already did this earlier. This just has the disclaimers that if you're going to use the ORC, you would put this in your product. You would literally just copy this this entire block. ORC notes this product is a license under the ORC license held in the Library of Congress at TX000, number to be determined, and available online at various locations, including blah 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 blah. So you would just copy and paste this. But what we want to read through is the actual ORC license, which is one that we're gonna go through today. Let me see here. I may need to turn a light off one moment here to make sure that we've got it might have been too much light going on. Nope, that wasn't enough, so we're good. Hang on. Green screen problems. All right, without further ado, let us start our deep dive. Before I get going any further, I am not a legal expert. If you need legal advice, please consult a legal professional. There is a disclaimer in my video down below, so I am, removing any responsibility from my own side of things. These are just my understandings of things, my readings of things, my opinion on things. Other people might have other opinions on things, and I am not a legal expert who is providing you with legal advice. I am simply providing you with an opinion as I read through the draft of the ORC license. Now that we've gotten the disclaimer out of the way, let's go ahead and read. So the Open RPG Creative License, otherwise known as the ORC, grants the right to use the ORC content subject to the terms and conditions set forth and reference as follows. Number one, and this is the most important thing to me, product identity. Product identity means trademarks, trade dress, and non-functional and creative expressions that are not essential to or can be varied without altering the ideas or methods of operation of a game, including works of visual art, music and sound design, and clearly expressed and sufficiently delineated characters, character organizations, dialogue, settings, locations, worlds, plots, or storylines, including proper nouns and the adjectives, names, and titles derived from proper nouns. The term product identity shall in no event include elements that have been previously designated as ORC content, adapted ORC content that are the otherwise exclusive property of one or more third parties, or that are in the public domain. This just means, in essence, the product identity is whatever you bring to the table that's unique to your world, your setting. Any characters, the names of places, the names of the world, the names of any unique monsters that might be unique to your world. That is all product identity. It also includes trade dress. So this was something that was very important with Dungeons and Dragons because the way that the player's handbook was designed internally was very important because they made claim to the layout, the font style, the colors, and everything else, so that if someone tried to copy something too similar, or copy something too closely to what the player's handbook looked like, that was literally grounds for trademark infringement, or copyright infringement, because they were copying something that looked too similar to what they had. So this is very important. Mostly it refers to the things that are your world. Now, ORC content is any material that would otherwise constitute product identity, but that has been expressly identified as ORC content by a licensor. And those expressions of ideas and methods of operation of a game, i.e. game mechanics, such as systems, procedures, processes, rules, laws, instructions, heuristics, routines, functional elements, command structures, principles, methodologies, operations, devices, and concepts of play, and the limitations, restraints, constraints, allowances, and affordances inherent in gameplay, including expressions describing the function of or providing instructions as to the following, such as. Now, this is where we get into some really interesting stuff, because this was all stuff that Wizards of the Coast was trying to nail down as inherently theirs. They actually would try to refer to this stuff as product identity at one point. So the first one on the list is character creation. Character creation and play of character and non-player characters, including statistics, attributes, stat blocks, traits, classes, jobs, alignments, professions, proficiencies, abilities, spells, skills, actions, reactions, interactions, resources, and equipments. So this is all going to be essentially anything that's related to a game mechanic, but not related to the product identity that is your product. And they have taken great pains to list everything under the sun here to make sure that none of this stuff can be locked down as product identity. This is a big thing for those of you who went through the original OGL. You can go back and look at the OGL. The player's handbook, character creation, the literal character creation process for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons is something that they have tried to claim as product identity, which is why if you look at what is included in the SRD, there is no actual character creation process in the SRD because they considered that to be product identity, not something that they were making available to the public through the system reference document. So their whole character creation process, roll 6 dice, choose these stats, have these races, so on and so forth. That was something that Dungeons and Dragons was saying, this is our product identity. However, that's really not product identity, because the character creation process is a widely used process that has variations on it throughout all these different games. And so I think one of the smart things that the ORC is doing here right away in the document is they are stating that all of these game mechanics that Wizards of the Coast tried to claim that they were laying claim to, and that they were trying to claim they had copyrighted and everything else. No, that's not the case. All these mechanics are actually just part of this ORC license that anyone can use. So I think that's an important breakaway of clearly defining that game mechanics cannot be copyrighted per se, and that they all fall under this, you know, expression of ideas and methods of operation. So, character creation and the play of those characters. Then it gets into systems and classifications, applicable gameplay, such as alignments, backgrounds, classes, experience points, levels and leveling up, encounters, combat, initiative and turn order, movement, monster statistics, creature types, traps, conditions, buffs and debuffs, terrain types, challenge ratings, difficulty classes, skill checks, saving throws, resting and resource management, classification of magic systems, spell and ability effects, looting items and equipment, diplomacy system, dialogue options, and outcome determination. So they are literally trying to throw everything in here and the kitchen sink to make sure that there's no way anyone could possibly misinterpret that these things are just part of gameplay and they can't be locked down as product identity. Methods of determining success, failure, or outcome, and any expressions of such methods, or such successes, failures, or outcomes, and methods and mediums by which players play the game, including dice rolling, random number generation, coin flipping, card drawing, play, applying modifiers to results of chance, creating or filling in character sheets, moving and interacting with tokens or figurines, drawing maps and illustrations, speaking, messaging, active pantomime, writing notes, asking questions, and making statements. For the avoidance of doubt, the term ORC content expressly excludes product identity, absent, and to the limited extent expressly designated as such by the licensor in the notice published pursuant to Article 3. So they're just making very, 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 very sure this is product identity, this is game mechanics, and these are all of the, infinitely, infinitely minuscule things that could potentially make up game mechanics, and they can't be copyrighted by anyone's source, and they are all available as part of this ORC license. Very important distinction here, because going back to, at one point in time, Wizards of the Coast tried to nail down and trademark dice rolling for the D20 system and tried to say, you can't use D20s because we own the trademark to that. No. Adapted ORC content means derivative works based on the ORC content that you create to the limited extent that such derivative works would otherwise constitute ORC content. Adapted ORC content expressly excludes works that would constitute product identity. Okay. Copyright and similar rights mean copyright and similar rights to performance, broadcast, and records and sue generous database rights without regard to the rights labeled colorize, and no event shall copyright and similar rights include trademarks or patent rights. Okay, that's a good distinction. By the way, if you don't understand the difference between trademark and copyright, I'm not going to go into that here, but there is a big difference. So you'll probably need to educate yourself on the difference between those two. If you have questions, just Google difference between trademark and copyright, because it's important. Effective technological measures means those measures that in the absence of proper authority may not be circumvented under laws fulfilling obligations under Article 11 of the WIPO Copyright Treaty adopted on December 29, 1960. Okay. Licensed rights means the rights granted to you, subject to the terms and conditions of this license, which are limited to all copyright and similar rights that apply to your use of the ORC content, and the licensor has authority to license. Okay. Licensor means any individual or entity granting rights under the ORC license. So this part's a little bit important because it means that you have the licensed rights to use anything from the ORC that the licensor has granted authority to license, and the licensor is any individual or entity granting rights under this license. So anyone who has chosen to make their content available through the ORC license is a licensor, and there's going to be many licensors who are a part of this. So anyone who's publishing something that is a part of the ORC Alliance is making their content freely available for other people to use downstream. So this is important to understand how that means, what that means here. So these are just some more legal terms. Term means use of copyright and similar rights. Use or used means material. You and your means individual or entity exercising rights. All right, grants and limitations. Subject to the terms and conditions of this ORC license, for the term license hereby grants you a worldwide, royalty-free, non-sub-licensable, non-exclusive, irrevocable license to exercise the licensed rights in the ORC content, to use the ORC content in whole or in part. And the licensor, anybody upstream from you, hereby authorizes you to exercise these licensed rights in all media and formats, whether now known or hereafter created, and to make technical modifications necessary to do so. The licensor, anybody upstream, waives and or agrees not to assert any right of authority to forbid you from making technical modifications necessary to exercise these license rights, including technical modifications necessary to circumvent effective technological measures. This is very important. So what there's multiple things happening here. So let's walk through these. First and foremost, this is the big thing that everybody wanted from the OGL that Wizards of the Coast was not willing to do. So the ORC is granting you a worldwide, royalty-free, non-sub-licensable, non-exclusive, irrevocable license to exercise the rights of ORC content, to use the ORC content in whole or full. Worldwide, everywhere in the world, royalty-free. You never have to owe anybody royalties. Non-sub-licensable. No one can sub-license anything. Non-exclusive. It's not exclusive. And it's irrevocable, which means it can never, ever, 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 ever be changed. Very important. Now, this next part is hugely important. So the first part was important because Wizards did not want to add irrevocable to the language. They were saying that, oh, well, technically, that language that was there didn't say irrevocable, therefore we can change it. That was their whole thing. This actually includes irrevocable. Now, the next part of this is very important because one of the things that Wizards of the Coast was trying to do with the original draft of their OGL stuff that they proposed in January was they were trying to say that the OGL document did not contain provisions for the evolution of virtual tabletop, video games, NFTs, and so on and so forth. The language that they've put forth here in section 2A is sufficiently, I don't want to say it's vague, but it's vague with sufficient focus that it should be clear to anyone reading the document. And this is the most important thing, because if this ever goes to court, it's going to be an interpretation issue. How did you interpret it? How is it interpreted? So they're laying this out as simply as they can, but there has to be some, specificity in terms of what does this actually mean. So let's walk through this. Okay, the licensor, anybody upstream from you, grants you the right to exercise your licensed rights in all media and formats. This is the important part, whether now known or hereafter created, which means we didn't know, when the OGL was first created 20 years ago, no one knew that virtual tabletop was going to become a thing. No one knew that streaming was going to become a thing, or that pantomime on the internet, creating TikTok taverns and cosplay. No one knew that any of that was going to be a thing and that people were going to be able to make a profit from doing those things. So what this is saying is that it doesn't matter what could potentially evolve in the future. This license allows you to exercise your licensed right in all, not limited, all media and formats, whether now known or hereafter created, and to make the technical modifications necessary to adapt your content to whatever media and format may become known in the future. The licensor, person upstream, waives and or agrees not to assert any right or authority to forbid you from making those technical modifications necessary to exercise your licensed rights. Okay, that's very important because that's one of the things that Wizards of the Coast was trying to prohibit people from doing, was they were trying to prohibit people from adapting content 20 years down the road to take advantage of new technology like virtual tabletop. So this is attempting to head that off at the pass and allow people the flexibility to modify it however they might need to in the future for any format, whether known now or hereafter created. Now here's the section about the grant of adapted content by you. You hereby receive an offer from the licensor to exercise the license right on the express condition that you also hereby grant to every recipient of the adapted ORC content and a similar offer to exercise their license rights in the adapted ORC content under the terms and conditions hereof pursuant to which such adapted ORC content shall be licensed to any such recipients. You may not offer or impose any additional or different terms or conditions on or apply any effective technological measures to the ORC content if doing so restricts exercise of the licensed rights by any recipient of the ORC content. It's basically just saying that you don't get to change the terms of this deal. You have to abide by the terms of the license to anybody who's using content that you have put into the ORC data pool. Database rights, where the license rights include sui generis, I don't know how to pronounce that. Database rights that apply to use the ORC content. This ORC license grants you the right to extract, reuse, reproduce, and use all or a substantial portion of the contents of the database. And if you include all or a potential substantial portion of the database contents, you should, that will constitute adapted ORC content. So what about the limitations here? It says here, nothing in this license constitutes or may be construed as permission to assert or imply that you are, or that your use of the ORC content is, connected with or sponsored, endorsed, or granted official status by the licensor upstream or others designated to receive attribution hereunder. Moral rights, such as the right of integrity, are not licensed under this ORC license, nor are publicity, privacy, and other similar personality rights. However, to the extent possible, the licensor waives and or agrees not to assert any such rights held by the licensor to the limited extent necessary to allow you to exercise the license rights, but not otherwise. To the extent possible, the licensor waives any right to collect royalties from you for the exercise of licensed rights or use of ORC content, whether directly or through a collecting society under any voluntary or waivable statutory or compulsory licensing scheme. So they're just, that's another, no one's going to come after you for royalties statement. In terms of required notice, the grant of this ORC license to you is expressly conditioned on you including a notice statement described in the subsections below in a reasonable manner based on the medium, means, and context in which you use the ORC content. So you need to provide a following statement. You need to have this copy and pasted somewhere prominently within your content. You also need to have an attribution notice, which is this right here. Just says you need to have a statement based on reasonable good faith efforts that identifies each licensor created of the ORC content you used. For the avoidance of doubt, both licensor and all parties similarly credited under licensor's attribution notice should be included in your attribution notice. So if you remember the big, multiple column thing that you could copy and paste from the OGL and put into the end of your book if you were using OGL, it's going to be the same thing here. There's going to be a thing that you can copy and paste and put into your content, and you're going to be required to do that because that's part of the attribution. It's the required notice. Also, a product identity notice, and this is a statement based on reasonable good faith efforts that identifies the elements of your product identity, if there's any, contained in the work for which you use the ORC content. For avoidance of doubt, such designations neither limit your rights in your product identity nor limit any downstream licensee's use of adapted ORC content. In the event of a conflict between your designation of product identity and the definition of ORC content, the definition shall control. Okay, so I'm making sure that I understand the way that reads. By the way, this would be a sample notice by way of example only of what you would need to put into your ORC content, whether it's a PDF, a video game, whatever you're using, etc. And then you would also list the expressly designated ORC content. Okay. This part right here, I need to read this again really quick. In the event of a conflict between your designation of product identity and the definition of ORC content, the definition shall control. What I understand that to mean is that the ORC, whatever is defined as ORC content, would end up being the default if there was ever any sort of conflict between what you claim is product identity versus what the license itself is defining as content from the ORC. I honestly don't know where that would ever come into question, but let me maybe give an example of this at the top of my head. Let's say that you create an orc that is your version of an orc, and it's really similar to another licensee's version of an orc, and you've used their races in yours, but you maybe forgot to say that your orc was different than their orc, and it's similar enough. If there is it says in the event of a conflict between what you designate as party A, the default ruling is going to be that, well, the ORC content that you pulled, that's the orc that is going to be credited, not your version, because maybe you forgot to put your version in, or your version wasn't unique enough, or something like that. I honestly, that's probably not a good example. So take that with a grain of salt. But I don't know where that would ever actually be an issue. But I understand why they put that wording in there, because it's a potential issue, and so they need to make sure they have wording in there for it. I would think that it's going to be very easy to determine what is product identity for most projects, at least in my mind, because from a homebrew perspective, the ORC content that I might choose to use would probably be related to rules. But then again, I might like someone's setting enough to say, you know what, I'm going to give this example. I really like Pathfinder. So I'm going to use the Pathfinder SRD, which is part of the ORC. I'm going to pull that into mine, and I'm going to just create my own sub-city, sub-planet, whatever. Um, that's probably not another good example either. Anyway, warranty and limitation of liabilities. This is standard stuff. What's to the extent possible, in no event will the licensor be liable to you on any legal theory or otherwise for any direct, special, indirect, incidental, consequential, punitive, exemplar, or other losses, costs, expenses, or damages arising out of this, even if the licensor has been advised of the possibility of such losses, costs, expenses, or damage. Hang on a second. Warranties title is and as available makes no requisitions or warranties of any kind. Disclaimer mark to use the extent in no event will the licensor be liable to you. So you can't sue anybody upstream, essentially. I think that's what we're getting at there. Other terms and conditions. Termination remedies. Your license to use this content will terminate automatically if you fail to comply with the terms and conditions. Your license will be reinstated effective as the date of termination if you cure such violation within 60 days of discovery of violations, or if the licensor waives a violation in writing. No such termination will affect, limit, or disrupt the rights of any licensor or downstream licensee of ORC content under any ORC license. Only the licensor and licensors upstream licensors under this ORC license may bring enforcement action against you or under. So nobody downstream can do anything against you, but people upstream can, because you're using their stuff. This constitutes a limitation on licensors' remedies with respect to the licenses granted in the ORC content hereunder. However, this ORC license neither limits licensors' remedies in any way with respect to product identity, nor does it limit their right to offer the ORC content or product identity under separate terms or conditions. The ORC license may not be modified. It may not be amended, superseded, modified, updated, repealed, revoked, or deauthorized. So this is another hugely important key phrase that people were freaking out about Wizards of the Coast. Hang on, which I'm looking over here. I've got a weird issue going on with. Oh, that's because I've got a chair back here. There, I spoiled the illusion. Yeah, it can't be deauthorized. That was the big thing, is Wizards of the Coast wanted to try to deauthorize things. Neither you nor the licensor may modify the terms of this ORC license. However, you may enter into a separate agreement of your own making, provided such agreement does not seek to modify the terms hereof. This ORC license does not and shall not be interpreted to reduce, limit, restrict, or impose conditions on any use of the ORC content that can be lawfully made without permission under this ORC license. Nothing in this license constitutes or may be interpreted as a limitation upon or waiver of any privileges and immunities that apply to the licensor or you, including from the legal processes of any jurisdiction or authority. Honestly, I think it's pretty straightforward. I do know that there's a section here. Who controls it? Who enforces it? This says it's only the upstream licensors, nobody downstream, and it's only the only remedy is, according to the documentation, limited to bringing you into compliance with the license. So there's not anything, we have intentionally not specified your jurisdiction, which means that anyone suing to enforce the ORC will need to bring that dispute into your jurisdiction. It's a tool intended to discourage litigation. I know there are questions happening in the Discord about what does this mean in terms of enforceable um, jurisdiction. Like, what happens if there's a ruling in France and everyone else says, well, we don't care about the ruling in France. We don't live in France. And if we don't live in France, then the ruling in France doesn't actually affect me because I live in Mexico or Spain or, the United States or Canada or Japan. There are some good questions being asked. There was also a question. I'm going to go look it up really quick here. I got to find it now. There was a misunderstanding. I'm going to read through this really quick, so bear with me. Someone was misinterpreting a section about section 2, D2. Let me go back to this through section 2, D2. So the moral rights, such as the right of integrity, are not licensed under this ORC license. And someone in the ORC Discord, so apparently somebody made a YouTube video about it, actually. No Nat 1 interpreted that section right here as a morality clause, that a licensor can force a licensee to alter any qualitative aspect of their product as long as they're not being forced to alter mechanical aspects. That's not what this means at all. As a matter of fact, it specifically says that moral rights are not licensed under this ORC license, nor are publicity, privacy, or other similar personality rights. And to the extent possible, the licensor, person upstream, waives and agrees not to assert any such rights held by the licensor to the extent necessary to allow you to exercise the license right, but not otherwise. That specifically is saying that there is no morality clause and that no one can force you to. I mean, that whoever made that video is completely misinterpreted what that says. This, as my interpretation of this reads, this is literally stating that no one has the moral right to do anything because it's not part of the license. There's no morality clause in this license, and moral rights and the right of integrity are not part of the license, nor are publicity, privacy, or other personality rights. Personality rights being I get to choose my pronouns and things of that nature. And the licensor, person upstream, agrees that they're not going to assert any such rights held by you, the licensor, to the limited extent necessary to allow you to exercise your license rights, which are your rights to product identity and ORC content and so on and so forth. So that literally is saying that there's no morality clause in this. So I don't know why that person thinks that that's a morality clause because it's not. Anyway, folks, that is my sort of in-depth read through today. Are there SRDs? I think this is going to be a good question that comes up later on down the pipeline. The important thing is that the ORC license is not a system reference document, and it says that it's designed not to require these. The fourth part of the notice gives you a place to include a system reference document content, which if you go over here to the example that they gave, expressly designated ORC content. The following elements are owned by the licensor and would otherwise constitute product identity and are hereby designated as ORC content. That would be the as they mention here, the fourth section, they actually show the example here as well, expressly designate area content. That fourth section is specifically for you to include a system reference document content if you're using it from someone else. So that's food for thought. Someone may create a system reference document that contains what they believe is a game mechanic system. Says the ORC license uses a definition system that defines what is licensed ORC content and what is unlicensed proprietary product identity and lifts this administrative burden from publishers. We believe these definitions are sufficiently robust to allow game designers, publishers, and lawyers acting in good faith to come to a common understanding about what is licensed, but that the administrative friction and potential for failure of coming up with an SRD for each product. So it's kind of going to be up to people if they want to include those SRD things or not. But the license is being designed to be system agnostic. So the whole concept of an SRD was to have a specific system reference document, but in a system agnostic license, it's not going to be a necessary component. But if someone were making a derivative work, they might want to use the SRD. And as the example I gave earlier of someone choosing to use Pathfinder as an example, that would be an example of using the Pathfinder SRD so that you're clearly showing that we're basing this book off of that system reference document and going from there. Yeah. So that is my read through. It's slightly a longer video today, so I apologize for that, but I wanted to actually take the chance to do a deep dive with everybody. So hopefully you appreciate all of that. If you have questions, drop them down below. I'll answer as best I can. Obviously, the best way for you to be involved is to get on over to the ORC Discord channel and take part in those conversations. So do that at your leisure and get up to speed and everything as you can. Stay tuned because we will be covering this as they continue to adapt it. And assuming that I like everything that it says, we will probably end up adapting the ORC for our tabletop product. As it stands right now, we are system agnostic, zero license. You don't need a license to publish your game, but it's helpful if you want to be a part of a larger pool of things. So we're continuing to watch how this evolves. I'm pretty happy with what I'm seeing so far. Obviously, I still need to see the final wording and everything and then get together with my brother and my wife and make sure that we're all happy on the same page with everything. But so far, so good. I'm seeing good things. I have no complaints whatsoever. I think it looks good. And there's sufficient stuff in there to cover all the things that concern me as a creator and a publisher. So food for thought. Love to hear your take on things. Drop them down below. Like, subscribe, hit that bell icon so you never miss an update. Support if you can. I do get to stay on the air full time thanks to the community because they pay my bills, not YouTube advertising, which does pay a little bit, but not a lot. So drop a super chat on these live streams and premieres. Do super thanks on uploads and YouTube shorts. Membership here on the channel down below. All of those options, by the way. Super chats and super thanks. YouTube has pre-programmed amounts, but you can choose what you want to put in. So if you want to do $50, $500, $2.72, whatever you can. Memberships start at $3 a month to go up from there. We have a Patreon page where we have our tabletop world, sourcebook, adventure modules, maps, map packs, art packs, and beyond, plus a fantasy book series that you get access to and a point-and-click adventure game set in the same world. So you can also support over on Patreon. And hopefully we'll see you in Discord where we're playing games together and doing all sorts of fun stuff. So until next time, everybody, stay safe. Happy gaming.